Some goodbyes don't begin with tears, but with a haunting silence that chills the air. He said, "You won't survive without me." And she, the woman who once believed in love as surely as she believed in sunlight, placed the set of keys on the table, then walked out of the house that used to be hers. She didn't know that with that step, she was opening the door to another journey, the rebirth of a woman who once thought she had lost everything. From being the betrayed, she became a symbol of pride, dignity, and the greatest love. The love for oneself. This is not just the story of a strong woman. It is the story of every woman who once believed she was fragile, until life left her no choice but to become strong. If you've ever lived in Seattle on a spring day with a drizzle, you'll understand what it feels like when the sky seems to whisper to the earth. Raindrops quietly touch the glass, tracing faint, dreamy lines, and the light suddenly softens, deepens. In that stillness, Linh stood in the middle of a greenhouse filled with the scent of flowers, holding an old camera in her hands. Her eyes were so focused that the whole world existed only within the frame she saw through the lens. She didn't know that day that a man had walked past her 3 times. He stopped at the door, watching her bend down to photograph pale lavender orchids, the light glinting off her honey-brown skin. Jonathan Baker, 36 years old, CEO of a tech corporation, son of one of the most powerful men in the Pacific Northwest, a man everyone thought nothing could make hesitate, except this moment. He took a deep breath, telling himself, "She's just a photographer. Why are your hands shaking like a first-year student's?" Finally, he stepped closer. "Do you come with the flowers, or must I buy you separately?" Linh looked up, her brows arched. "That might be in the top 3 worst pickup lines I've ever heard." Jonathan flushed for real, lowering his head, his voice small. "I know," I panicked. "Can I have another chance?" She smiled softly, just enough to ease the air between them. "All right, 1 chance. But try not to make someone want to run away this time." He exhaled, as if finding his footing again. "I've been circling this place for 20 minutes, trying to figure out how to talk to you without breaking the moment you were capturing. I saw how you looked at those flowers like you were listening to them. I just wanted to know what they were saying." The camera in Lin's hands lowered slowly. "That's better." And just like that, they talked for 2 hours about light, people, the scent of orchids, and the loneliness of a city that never stopped moving. When the greenhouse closed, Jonathan still wasn't ready to leave. That afternoon, they stopped by a small cafe on the corner, where the porcelain cups were slightly cracked, but the coffee tasted unexpectedly perfect. He told her about his childhood in a home where dinner was a private meeting, and affection had long been replaced by achievement. "I grew up in a house where compliments were rarer than diamonds." She smiled wistfully. "I grew up in an apartment with a leaky roof. But my grandmother, the one who raised me, used to say, 'You can be poor in money, but never poor in grace or heart.'" His gaze lingered on her. "Your grandmother must have been wise. She used to tell me, 'Real strength is when you can keep your heart soft, even after life's made you hard.' Do you still keep it soft?" "I'm still learning how, every day." Jonathan was quiet for a while. Linh saw something deeply human in him in that silence, a man tired of being strong for too long. Days passed, and they saw each other again. He brought food to her tiny apartment, barely enough space for a futon, a few potted plants, and an unfinished dream. They ate on the floor, sharing cold pizza, but to her, it was the best meal she'd had in months. He didn't ask what she wanted, didn't try to rescue her. He just stayed. One night, as Linh quietly hid a stack of overdue bills, Jonathan saw. He said nothing at first, then gently touched her shoulder. "Let me help you. I don't need it, but I want to." She laughed through her tears. "You know, helping someone isn't always a favor. Sometimes, it's a chance to feel useful again." From that day, they became inseparable. Jonathan slowly realized that what he'd been searching for wasn't someone to admire him, but someone who made him want to be kind. On an ordinary Tuesday night, in a small kitchen filled with steam, between the bubbling of water and the clinking of knives, he suddenly said, "Marry me, Linh?" She froze, the spoon in her hand halting mid-stir. "Are you serious?" "As serious as breathing. I don't have a ring or champagne, but I have one certainty: I want to wake up next to you every morning." She laughed, tears welling up. "You have the worst timing for a proposal, but maybe the best decision of my life." She nodded, her voice trembling. "Yes." Their wedding was small, held in a lavender garden. Only close friends, family, and Jonathan's father, Richard Baker, the famously stern man, were there. At first, his eyes held doubt. This girl, an ordinary photographer, what could she possibly offer the son he'd raised in gold? But when Linh smiled and asked him for a slow waltz during the reception, that look began to change. "Mr. Baker, I know you've taught Jonathan many valuable things. I just wanted to say he's still trying every day to make you proud. You understand my son better than most. He just needs to know that success doesn't have to mean becoming ruthless. Keep that in him, will you?" He nodded, and she smiled. "I'll try." The days that followed were a dream. Every morning, Jonathan woke her with a perfectly made cup of coffee. No matter how packed his meetings were every Thursday night, he came home early to cook with her. "Why always Thursday?" he once asked. "Because Thursday's the hardest day of the week. Friday's close to the end, but Thursday's when we need each other the most." They danced in the kitchen, barefoot on the wooden floor, the only music the rhythm of their hearts. Linh always stood out effortlessly at grand events Jonathan had to attend. She never said much, never overdressed, but when she smiled, the whole room seemed to glow. Her sincerity drew people in, even those who once thought she'd be just a shadow in his life. One night after a charity gala, as their car left the highway, Jonathan suddenly pulled over. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. I just need to say this." He turned to her, the streetlights reflecting across his face. "Before I met you, I measured worth in money and results. But watching you talk to people so naturally, without calculation, I realized you make me want to be better, not richer." Linh squeezed his hand. "You've always been good. I just reminded you of it." Those were the days when they had everything: love, peace, and mornings bathed in Seattle light. But happiness, sometimes, is like orchids in a greenhouse, so beautiful, yet fragile. People get lost in admiring them, forgetting that a single breath of wind can make the petals fall. One afternoon, as Linh was photographing flowers in the garden behind their house, Jonathan sat on the porch, smiling with a glass of wine. She turned and saw him watching her, and for that one moment, the whole world seemed to stand still. She didn't know then that it would be the last time he'd look at her with that peaceful gaze. A new season's wind was coming, soft as a sigh, yet strong enough to take everything away. Some changes don't begin with arguments, but with silence. No one notices when smiles at the dinner table grow scarce, or when the morning touch on the shoulder quietly disappears. It all comes so softly, as if someone were slowly turning down the song's volume that once filled the whole house. For Linh, it began with Jonathan coming home late. At first, it was a few minutes, then hours. He said the same familiar things. The meeting ran longer than expected. "I had to meet a client. Just one project, then I'll rest." But she sat by the window each time, listening to the rain tapping on the glass, uneasy without knowing why. One evening, she made his favorite beef stew with red wine, waited until 9, then 10. Finally, she turned off the stove, poured herself a glass, and ate alone. When he came home, there was a trace of alcohol and a faint, unfamiliar perfume on his shirt. "You're still up?" he asked, removing his coat. "I was waiting for you. I told you not to wait." That line, so casual, made her heart tighten. The next day, she brought lunch to his office, hoping to surprise him. But when she arrived, she saw the look in his assistant's eyes, a mix of pity and discomfort, as if she had wandered into a place that no longer belonged to her. She set the lunchbox down and said softly, "Please give this to Mr. Jonathan for me." The assistant forced a polite smile. "Of course, if he's in today." On the way home, stopped at a red light, Linh suddenly felt a cold stillness inside. Everything she had believed in seemed to drift far away, but she didn't ask. She still chose to trust. To believe he was simply busy, to believe things would return to how they were. That night, she woke in the middle of her sleep. The bed beside her was cold. The pale blue light from his phone still glowed, and on the screen flashed a message: "I miss you. Don't let her find out." She stared for a few seconds, then quietly turned off the screen. No anger, no shouting, just the awareness that something had broken could never be made whole again. The next morning, when he woke, she still made coffee as usual. "Did you sleep well?" "Well enough. I worked late last night." "I know," she said calmly. Jonathan smiled, kissed her cheek as if nothing had happened. But for Linh, every kiss tasted faintly of deceit from that moment on. Day by day, she lived in a beautiful but silent house. He spoke less, looked less, and when he did, his tone carried impatience. She remained gentle, attentive as if everything might return by holding on long enough. One evening, Jonathan's father, Mr. Richard, came for dinner. As Linh poured wine, he looked at her for a long moment before saying quietly, "Are you all right, dear?" She nodded and smiled. "Yes, I'm fine." He placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice deep. "Sometimes, fine isn't real. But keep it, if you need time." Linh could only smile faintly, realizing even his father saw what she dared not say. After dinner, Jonathan said he had another client meeting. She watched him go, the rain still falling outside. As his headlights disappeared into the night, she whispered to herself, "Maybe love is when you're hurt, yet you still don't want the other person to feel guilty." A week later, she found a restaurant receipt tucked into Jonathan's jacket pocket, 2 glasses of wine, 2 meals, when he said he was in a meeting. She sat down, the small piece of paper trembling in her hands. No tears, just an emptiness spreading inside. When Jonathan returned, she placed the receipt on the table. "I found this." He was silent for a few seconds, then said evenly, "It was dinner with a client." What kind of client orders a menu for lovers? His grip on his briefcase tightened, irritation flashing across his eyes. "Are you trying to turn this into a scene?" "No, I'm just asking." "Asking for what? To start a fight?" Her voice stayed soft. "No. To know what I'm living in." He sighed and turned away. "I'm tired. I don't want to talk about this." The office door closed and the distance between them, from that moment, never closed again. In the days that followed, he stayed at the office more often. Their dinners disappeared. On Thursday nights, the chair across from her remained empty. She stopped making beef stew, stopped setting flowers on the table, just brewed a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the endless Seattle rain. One night, his phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Grace Miller, a name she'd heard in magazines, a celebrated fashion designer. She didn't touch the phone. But when he woke, she said quietly, "Grace called you." Jonathan startled slightly, then quickly composed himself. "A client, nothing more." Linh nodded. She didn't press. She'd learned that when someone wants to hide, the more you ask, the farther they go. Days slipped by in the fog of routine. Sometimes, she still saw the glow of his computer light through the crack of the study door late into the night. Once, she stood outside and heard his low voice on the phone. "I miss you too. It's just not the right time yet." That sentence, so soft, cut deeper than a knife. The next morning, she didn't make him coffee. When he asked, she said, "I figured someone else could do that for you now." For the first time, Jonathan truly looked at her, surprised, a trace of fear flickering in his eyes. But he said nothing, just bent down to tie his shoes and left the house. That evening, she walked through the living room, light spilling over the wedding photos lining the hallway. She stopped at one, both smiling in the lavender garden, so happy it now looked almost false. She took it down and placed it face down on the shelf. That night, she called Aunt Mai. Her voice trembled. "Auntie, I don't know if I can bear it anymore. My dear, the worst thing isn't losing someone, it's losing yourself trying to keep them." Her tears burned hot. Aunt Mai asked, "Do you still love him?" "Yes, but I don't trust him anymore." "Then you already know what you must do." Linh stayed silent, and in that silence, the wind howled outside the window. Seattle's spring was still damp, but inside her, another season had begun, the season of things about to break. They say betrayal often arrives on the most ordinary of days. There were no warning signs. Just another damp Seattle morning. Linh is still brewing coffee, still hearing his car pulling out of the garage like every other day. Only this time, she knew. She knew she was about to hear something that would change her life forever. She didn't need anyone to tell her. She didn't need proof. The way he avoided her eyes and said, "I'm busy," without offering a reason, it was as if a tiny clock was ticking inside her chest, counting down the seconds until the truth broke free. That afternoon, he came home early, something rare. It was raining, and Lin sat by the window, camera in hand, though she hadn't taken a single shot. When he stepped inside, the chill from outside followed him, along with a perfume she already knew too well. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and dry. She set the camera down and met his eyes. "I know." He sat across from her, his gaze fixed somewhere else. "I don't know where to start." "Just say it," she said gently. "Don't choose the right words, just choose the truth." Jonathan clasped his hands tightly. I'm seeing someone else." The world seemed to stop. The rain outside fell in even rhythm. The clock ticked, her breath caught mid-chest. "I know," she said quietly, and his head jerked up, startled. "You knew?" "For a long time. I just wanted to see if you'd have the courage to say it." He was silent for a moment, then nodded. "I'm sorry, but I don't regret it." The words fell softly, like a stone dropped into still water, but the ripples shattered her entire world. "You don't regret it?" "Because she makes me feel like myself." "And me?" "You make me try to be better. And I'm tired." She pressed her lips together. For a second, she wanted to scream, to throw something, but instead, she laughed. "So, goodness can be exhausting too, huh?" Jonathan looked at her, his eyes cold. "I just wanted to be honest. I still care about you. But I love her too." "Love," she repeated, her voice trembling. "You think something born of betrayal still deserves that word?" He said nothing. Then, abruptly, as if to finish it all quickly, he added, "I don't want a divorce. I want to keep both of you." She stared at him, unblinking. Only the rain tapped the glass in the wide, quiet room's roof. "What did you just say, Jonathan?" "I don't want to lose you, but I can't leave her either." "And what do you think I am in this story?" "You're a part of my life I can't let go." She stood up, her hands trembling. "You want to keep both?" "Yes, because I believe you understand me, and you'll accept it." "Why would you think that?" "Because you're too kind, Lin. Because I know you wouldn't survive without me." Her laugh broke, choked between disbelief and pain. "You think I'm that weak?" He shrugged, calm as if discussing business. "I know I'm the only one who can give you this life. The house, the name, the safety. What you just listed," she said softly, "isn't love. It's a prison paved with marble." Jonathan froze for a few seconds, then stood, his tone brittle. "I don't want to fight. I just told you the truth." He walked out, leaving her standing there. She heard the door close, the wind slip through the cracks, and the sound of her heart breaking bit by bit. She sat down, hands clutching her chest. The tears came not of pain, but exhaustion. After a while, she rose, wiped her face, and looked around the house once filled with laughter, now echoing with a single line. "You wouldn't survive without me." She whispered back in her mind, "You're wrong." That night, Lin didn't sleep. She opened the closet and pulled out her suitcase. Outside, the rain still fell steadily. She folded each shirt, each photograph, each small keepsake calmly, without rush. The sound of the zipper closing was like a hymn of release in the quiet. Before leaving, she stopped in the living room. The room that once held their laughter, their cooking, their small, shared moments now. Only ghosts of memories remained. She looked at the wedding photo, her fingers brushing the radiant smiles frozen in time. "Goodbye," she whispered, and turned away. But before stepping out, she paused. From her pocket, she pulled a small piece of paper and wrote a few lines. "I'm not angry. I can't live in a place where truth no longer exists. I will live, and I will be happy. Lin, **. She placed the note on the table beside her wedding ring. It wasn't an act of revenge, but a ritual of awakening. Before she left, she noticed the car keys, the credit cards, everything he had once given her so she'd never have to worry. She set them neatly on the cold marble counter. Then she walked out. The Seattle wind whipped through her hair, cold, sharp, but for the first time, she felt herself truly breathing. She pulled her suitcase along the dark street, yellow lights glinting on the wet pavement. The wheels rolling through puddles echoed like the steady rhythm of her heart, firm, deliberate, alive. At the end of the block, she turned back. The light still glowed from the living room where Jonathan would soon return, read her note, and realized he'd lost something no money could ever buy back. She had only $847 left in her pocket, but she had something he no longer had: freedom. A taxi stopped beside her. The driver asked, "Where to, ma'am?" "Portland. My Aunt Mai's." As the car moved, the city faded behind her. She rested her head against the window, watching the lights slip by, each one a memory, bright, then dim, then gone. She whispered, barely audible, as if speaking to herself, "I'll survive, Jonathan. In fact, I'll live well." And just like that, an old chapter closed. No thunder, no grand tragedy, just a woman who chose to leave in silence. And in that silence, her voice carried farther than any cry ever could. That morning, Seattle didn't rain. For the first time in weeks, the sky was clear, an unfamiliar shade of blue. But to Linh, it felt unnervingly still. Sunlight spilled through the window pane, stretching across the cold floor. She walked barefoot, the wooden boards creaking softly beneath her feet, her heart calm as a still lake. The house was the same, spotless, fragrant with coffee, the paintings perfectly straight, but it had become a museum of the past to her. She stood before the dining table, taking in everything one last time. The vase of purple orchids Jonathan had given her for her birthday still bloomed. The white porcelain cup he'd bought in Italy still sat on the shelf. And beside it, the car keys, wedding ring, and bank cards all neatly arranged, as if waiting for her. She opened the cabinet and took out a small canvas bag. Inside were her old camera, a few clothes, a knitted blanket Aunt Mai had made, and a photograph of her grandmother. That was all, nothing more. She brewed herself one last cup of coffee. She took the first sip and realized the bitterness no longer frightened her. She slipped off her wedding ring and placed it at the center of the table. The ring caught the sunlight, shimmering, yet cold. Next to it, she left a short note. "I don't belong to this house anymore. I can't stay where honesty is mistaken for weakness. I'm leaving everything except myself." She took a deep breath, then opened the door, stepped into the hallway, and paused at the threshold. The morning wind brushed her hair, gentle, yet piercing. From her coat pocket, she pulled out the ring of keys. Her fingers tightened, then released. The sound of metal hitting stone rang out clean, bright, and yet it tore through a piece of her old soul. She whispered, without looking back, "That's it, Linh." A single tear fell not from pain, but from release. It was the tear of someone who had chosen freedom. She walked down the steps, pulling her suitcase behind her. Sunlight glimmered on the damp pavement, steam rising like a thin veil. In the distance, cars hummed, and birds called across rooftops. Everything was ordinary except her heart, beating to a new rhythm. She heard the automatic door close behind her as she passed through the gate. The lock clicked sharp, final like a period at the end of a long sentence. She stopped momentarily, tilting her head toward the vast blue sky. It was so bright it made her dizzy. She smiled, whispering into her breath, "God, thank you for giving me the courage to walk away." She hailed a taxi to the train station. The driver, an elderly black man with a kind smile, asked softly, "Going far, miss?" "Farther than ever, but maybe closer to myself." He chuckled, "I'd guess you just did something hard. Maybe the only truly right thing I've ever done." As they drove, Seattle faded behind the window. Familiar streets turned foreign. The cafes they'd once sat in, the corners they'd walked, all now hollow shells of memory. And somewhere in that city, the man who once said "you wouldn't survive without me" still didn't know he'd just lost the one thing money could never buy back. The taxi stopped before a small house in Portland, where Aunt Mai lived. The scent of wood and tea drifted from the doorway. Linh stepped out, paid the fare, and pulled her suitcase up the steps. The door opened. Aunt Mai stood there, small, silver-haired, kind-faced. Neither of them spoke. She opened her arms. Linh collapsed into them, sobbing, crying like a child. Her body shook, her tears spilling freely after being held in for too long. Aunt Mai stroked her back, her voice low and warm. "Cry, my dear. Then stop." "Auntie, I'm scared." "Good. Fear means you're still alive." They sat at the kitchen table. Aunt Mai poured tea and asked, "What did you leave behind?" "Everything." "And what did you bring?" "Myself." Aunt Mai smiled, eyes gentle as spring air. "That's enough. You don't know it yet, but many people never carry themselves out of pain." Harlin looked around the small yellow-walled house, the old photos, the wildflowers in jars. There was no luxury, no crystal chandeliers, only peace. "Auntie, I have nothing. You have breath, you have freedom, you have faith. And you know, freedom is the most expensive thing in the world." That night, they sat on the porch as Portland's rain began to fall softly. Harlin sipped ginger tea, listening to the rain on the tin roof, her heart heavy, but not burdened. "Auntie, do you think I can start over?" "Of course. But not to start the same life again. To begin a new one where you no longer need anyone else to define who you are." Those words left her silent for a long time. Outside, the rain shimmered like threads of silver. In the dim light, Aunt Mai's reflection in the teacup was warm, calm, and full of love. Before bed, Aunt Mai placed a hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes God takes away what we think is everything, just to remind us that we are everything." That night, Harlin slept peacefully for the first time in months. No more dreams of shouting, no more cold stares, only the sound of rain and the scent of warm tea. The next morning, she stepped into the yard when the sun rose. Light filtered through the leaves, settling on her hair. She drew a deep breath, lifted her camera, and took the first photograph of her new chapter, a small flower growing from a crack in the wet cement after the rain. And in that moment, Harlin understood. She hadn't lost anything at all. She had only just begun to live genuinely. Jonathan Baker woke, as he always did the morning after Harlin left. Seattle light filtered through the white curtains, casting soft patterns on the wall. He reached for her side of the bed, empty sheets, cold pillow. At first, he thought she was in the kitchen, but when he stepped into the living room, the silence was so deep he could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Her coffee cup still sat in its usual place, but the second cup was missing. On the table lay a folded note and a set of keys. He unfolded the paper. The handwriting was neat, familiar. He read slowly, each line cutting a little deeper. "I'm leaving everything except myself." Signed, Lynn. Jonathan stood frozen. Every sound disappeared, the cars outside, the faint drizzle, and even his breath. He looked around. No suitcase, no shoes, no dresses hanging in the closet. Everything was perfectly in place, except her. The first feeling wasn't pain, it was disbelief. He had never imagined she would actually leave. He grabbed his phone and called her. No answer. He called again. Nothing. He texted. No reply. He sat down, pressing his hands to his temples, his pulse pounding, and in the silence, his own voice echoed back. "You won't survive without me." But now, she had proven him wrong. By noon, he still hadn't moved. The phone rang. It was his assistant. "Sir, there's a problem with the Westmark investment accounts. They said they need Mrs. Baker's signature." "What? Why her? All corporate accounts are co-signed. You insisted on it yourself, for legal protection. Only 2 people can authorize transactions, you and your wife." Jonathan went still. He remembered how he had thought it clever to bind her to him, attaching her name to every major contract so she couldn't leave. Now that same chain had turned on its master. "She's gone," he said quietly. "Then you'll need to come in immediately," the assistant urged. "Payments are frozen. Projects are on hold." That afternoon, his office buzzed like a hive of panic. Reports piled high, phones ringing non-stop. The CFO said bluntly, "If we don't get Mrs. Baker's confirmation within 48 hours, all cash flow will lock up." Jonathan stared at the screen, hundreds of millions frozen, immovable. He said nothing for a long time, and in that stillness, he understood what losing control truly meant. Not just over money, but over his life. Night fell. He drove home through the rain, city lights reflecting off the hood. Every song on the radio reminded him of her. At home, he opened the fridge. Only an old bottle of wine remained. He sat on the floor and drank straight from it. The clink of glass against the table echoed coldly. He looked at their wedding photo. She smiled. He looked proud. Now, both those things were gone. He told himself, she'll come back. She's just angry. He waited. Day 2, she didn't return. Day 3, the accounts were thoroughly frozen. Day 5, clients began to pull out. Day 10, headlines read crisis at Baker Holdings. Jonathan sat in the dark, the phone buzzing relentlessly. Again and again, he looked at her note. I'm leaving everything except myself. Only now did he understand it wasn't a farewell. It was a declaration. On the 11th day, his father, Richard Baker, appeared. The door opened sharply. The older man entered, shoes clicking on the marble floor, eyes hard as steel. What have you done to this company, Jonathan? I'm handling it. Handling it. Stocks down 12%, investors panicking, banks shutting down lines of credit. That's what you call handling. Jonathan said nothing. Richard's gaze swept the room, landing on the table where the keys still lay. She's gone, isn't she? Yes. The older man sighed. Don't you see? She was your foundation. Not because she signed papers, but because when she was beside you, you remembered how to be decent. Jonathan's jaw tightened. I don't need anyone to make me decent. You're wrong. Decency isn't instinct, it's a choice. And you chose to stop making it. Silence stretched between them. Richard shook his head, voice rough with disappointment. I thought you were smarter than this. But you're just like me, clinging to power until there's nothing left to hold. He turned and walked out, leaving Jonathan standing in the hollow of his own empire. That night, Jonathan sat alone for the first time in years. No phone, no meetings, no wine, only silence. And in that silence, he heard something he hadn't heard in years, the small, weary voice inside himself. He remembered her laughter over morning coffee, the scent of lavender, the way sunlight fell across her face, and her quiet words. The only thing you ever needed to learn is how to stop. He had never stopped, until now. Outside, the rain began again. On the table, her note still lay. He placed a hand over it, reading for the 10th, the 20th time. And finally, he laughed, a low, broken sound that caught in his throat. She had won, not through vengeance, but through the serenity of someone who had nothing left to lose. Jonathan looked out the window. The sky was dull grey, and in the thin veil of mist, he saw his own reflection, the wealthiest man in the city, but poorer than anyone who still had a place they could call home. On her first morning in Portland, Linh woke in the small attic room of Aunt Mai's house. Sunlight filtered through the faded floral curtain, brushing across her face. The smell of toast and coffee drifted from the kitchen, mingling with the damp scent of old wood. She lay still for a few minutes, listening to the birds outside the window. No more phone calls, engines humming from a luxury garage. No more cold footsteps of a man walking past. Only silence and peace. When she went downstairs, Aunt Mai was sewing a handkerchief. You're up early, Auntie. At my age, one doesn't need much sleep, Aunt Mai said gently. I still don't know what to do next. That's all right. Just sit still for a while. Learn to be still, my dear. The words made Linh smile faintly. For years, she had been running after love, from loneliness to hold on to a life slipping from her grasp. Now, she was allowed to stop. She walked through the small garden behind the house. The earth smelled of rain and fallen leaves. A tiny flower had pushed through a crack in the cement, pale purple, fragile yet fierce. She crouched down, studied it closely, then lifted her camera. Click. Her first photograph since leaving Seattle. That afternoon, she edited the photo, adjusted the light, and posted it to the social media account she had abandoned long ago. The caption read, "Everything can grow again, even from a crack." She hadn't expected the post to spread so quickly. The first comment came from an old friend. You're still here, Linh, still capturing beauty like you used to. Then more followed. Are you okay? This picture feels so peaceful. She read each one, her heart warming not from attention, but from the realization that someone still heard her voice somewhere. That evening, she helped Aunt Mai clean out the old storage room. In one corner, they found a box that had belonged to her grandmother. Copper wire, beads, small crafting tools. Grandma used to make jewelry? Yes, Aunt Mai smiled. She used to say, even metal that's been bent can still become beautiful. Can I try? Of course. You've always had careful hands. Lin sat at the wooden table, switched on a small lamp, and began twisting the first wire. Her hands trembled, but her heart was calm. An hour later, she'd made a simple bracelet, with a grey stone at the center ash-colored, yet glowing softly under the light. She took a photo and posted it with the caption, "Aftermath, beauty that comes after the hurt." The next morning, a message arrived. "Is this bracelet still available? I'd love to buy it." Lin laughed aloud. Her first order, not worth thousands, just $25, but it brought tears to her eyes. She ran downstairs and hugged Aunt Mai. "Auntie, I sold it." "Sold what?" "The bracelet I made last night." "Then you've begun," Aunt Mai said, pride glowing. "When we create from the heart, the world always answers." That night, Lin wrote in her journal, "The first day of my new life. No money, no fame, only my hands and faith." Days became weeks. Weeks became a month. Her routine settled. Mornings for photography, afternoons for crafting jewelry, evenings for editing photos and posting her work. She named her small brand Soul-Weaved Yet Hone. The name came to her on a sleepless night, thinking of the copper wires twisting under her hands like her own life, bent and reshaped, yet still beautiful. Her pieces began attracting attention not for their polish but their quiet soul. A bracelet called Resilience, a pair of earrings named Whisper of Rain. Each piece was photographed through her old lens, bathed in natural light, and described with soft words like poems. Messages poured in from women around the world. "I just got divorced, too. Thank you for reminding me I can start again. I wore your bracelet to my job interview and got the job." She wept as she read them, not from pity, but from knowing her pain had become someone else's light. One afternoon, Aunt Mai watched her at the workbench, shaping a coil of wire. "You know, when you work, you look just like your grandmother." Was she quiet like this too? Yes. She used to say, "When your hands are busy, your heart finds peace." Lin smiled. "Then I think I'm close to peace." She turned on the small radio. A soft jazz tune floated through the air. Sunlight streamed across the window, landing on her hands. At that moment, Lin realized she was living without anyone to define her worth. One day, an email arrived. "Hello, we're Morning Dew Boutique in Portland. We'd love to showcase Soul-Weave in our store. Would you be interested in a collaboration?" She read it repeatedly, heart racing not because of the offer, but because it was proof that the world was seeing her. Aunt Mai hugged her, laughing. "You see? When you stand firm, opportunities find you." "I'm scared, Auntie. What if success makes me forget who I am?" "No," she said softly. "Someone who once lost everything to find herself never forgets who she is." That night, they sat together on the porch. Rain began to fall over Portland. Lin held out her hand, catching the drops, and smiled. For the first time, the rain didn't feel cold. Inside, her old camera still glowed on the table. On its screen was a photo she had just taken. Two hands shaping silver wire. A rain-streaked window in the background. Below it, she wrote the caption, "I once fell apart, but it turns out that wasn't the end. It was the first time I learned how to begin." 3 months after leaving Seattle, Lin's life had settled into the calm of a still lake. She no longer startled at the sound of her phone, no longer checked messages at night, and no longer waited for anyone to come home. The little attic in Aunt Mai's old house had become her world, a small studio filled with morning light, the scent of metal and coffee, and a faint trace of burnt wood drifting in the cold Portland air. She brewed a cup of black coffee every morning, threw open the window, and played soft jazz. The sound of the saxophone melted into the chirping of sparrows on the eaves. She would sit there for a long while, just feeling life begin again, little by little, like a painting being redrawn after someone had wiped it clean. On her desk lay coils of copper wire, small shining stones. She cut, bent, and shaped each strand carefully, slowly, deliberately. Every curve was a breath, every joint a wound sewn shut with light. One morning, the phone rang as she adjusted the clasp on a bracelet. A soft female voice spoke. "Hello, this is Emily from Portland Life magazine. I'd love to interview you about your journey with Soulweave." Soul? What? Soulweave. Your brand, right? I followed your page for a while. Your story spreads everywhere and I think people need to hear it. Harlin laughed gently, a little shy. "I only make a few small pieces. It's nothing worth writing about. You've inspired thousands to stand up after they've fallen. Do you really think that's small?" The interview took place the next day. Emily brought a tiny recorder and a worn notebook. She didn't ask many questions, she mostly listened. When Harlin spoke of the morning she walked out of the big house in Seattle, Emily didn't interrupt. She just looked at her with warmth in her eyes. "Do you ever regret it?" Emily asked softly. "Yes. I regret being silent for so long, but not for leaving." "Did you know what you'd do after you left?" "No. I only knew I needed to breathe. And to make something with my hands, heart, not money." Emily smiled and jotted a few notes. Before leaving, she said, "Thank you for your honesty. I think this story will make people cry." Harlin smiled as she walked her to the door. What she felt wasn't pride, it was relief. Not because she'd be in a magazine, but because someone had truly listened. A week later, the article was published. The title was simple, "From Ashes, the story of a woman who wove her soul back together." It spread faster than anything she had ever experienced. Hundreds, then thousands, shared it. Messages and emails flooded in. "Thank you for reminding me that I can start again. I just left a 15-year marriage. Your story made me cry. I wear your bracelet whenever I feel weak." Harlin read every word, her eyes blurring. She had never imagined that she could reach hearts so far away from one small room and a pair of trembling hands. That evening, Aunt Mai found her surrounded by orders, eyes red but smiling. "Working late again?" "Auntie, they're not buying the jewelry because it's pretty. They're buying it because they see themselves in it." Aunt Mai placed a hand on her shoulder, her gaze tender. "You know, you've found the most important thing. Not making a living, but making life come alive again." Harlin said nothing, just kept shaping the wire. The warm lamplight gleamed across her wrist, and she felt something she hadn't in a long time. This could be what peace truly felt like. One crisp autumn morning, as she sealed a batch of packages, an email arrived. "Hello, Ling. I'm Charlotte, creative director of Aurora Collective, an international brand focused on handcrafted and recycled design. We'd love to collaborate with you on our upcoming spring collection, themed Rebirth. We believe no one could tell that story better than you." She read it again and again, her heart racing. Aurora Collective, the same name she used to hear at glittering galas when she was Jonathan's wife, where people spoke of art and stock prices in the same breath. And now, they were reaching out to a woman who once had nothing. Aunt Mai saw her staring blankly at the screen. "What is it, dear?" "Auntie, they want to work with me." "Who?" "Aurora Collective, the big one." "Oh." Aunt Mai chuckled, her smile proud and warm. "Seems heaven finally rewards those who endure." Harlin was quiet for a moment. "Auntie, I'm scared." "Of what?" "They'll use me as some tragic story to sell beauty." "Then just be yourself. Real pain can't be faked." The photo shoot took place in a large downtown studio. She didn't wear designer gowns or red lipstick. Just a simple white shirt, grey linen pants, her hair in a low bun, and around her neck the aftermath necklace, the first piece she had ever made with trembling hands that first night in Portland. When the photographer said, "Can you smile?" she replied softly, "I don't need to smile. I need to breathe." That photograph, no smile, just deep, quiet peace, appeared on the cover of Bloom International that March. The words beneath it read, "Harlin, the woman who turned cracks into light." She received hundreds of messages when the issue came out, but one letter left her speechless. Cream-colored paper, the handwriting shaky. "I'm 73. I just left a 51-year marriage. I'm afraid, but I know I can begin again after reading about you. Thank you for being brave so I could be brave too." Harlin folded the letter, tears spilling onto the edge of the page. Aunt Mai saw and said quietly, "You see, you're doing something money could never buy, helping people remember they still matter." From then on, Harlin began hosting small weekend workshops for women who had been broken. They came from everywhere. Widows, the betrayed, the beaten, the ones who had walked away from empty lives. They gathered around the old wooden table in her studio, hands trembling as they held pliers and wire, listening to Lin's gentle voice. Here, we're not just making bracelets or earrings. We're remaking ourselves. Each wire you bend is a wound that's learning to heal. A young woman looked up and asked quietly, "Lin, how do you know when you've truly healed?" Lin smiled softly, eyes warm. "When you can tell your story without feeling small." The room fell silent. Then someone laughed through tears, another sobbed, and in between the sounds of pain came small bursts of laughter like sunlight breaking through clouds. That night, after the workshop, Lin lit a candle and wrote in her journal, "Today I watched other women rise again, and I realized I didn't just survive. I've become proof that survival is possible." She set down her pen and looked out the window. The Portland night was draped in light rain. She opened the door, held out her hand, and smiled as the drops touched her skin. Months ago, rain had made her shiver. Now, it only made her feel alive. She whispered, as if speaking to someone far away, "If anyone is listening, please believe pain isn't the period at the end of your story. It's just the comma before you begin again." Elsewhere, about 170 miles from Portland, Jonathan Baker sat in a house so large that even his breathing echoed. 3 months, then 6, then a whole year had passed since Lin left, and no one had stepped inside that house except him. The kitchen stayed cold, the walls white, the dining table empty, everything in place, except for the warmth of another human being. Every morning, he rose at 6, made his coffee, and placed a second cup across from him, out of habit. But when his eyes fell on the empty chair, he was reminded the person who once sat there no longer lived in his world. He tried to keep working, appearing in meetings, maintaining the calm of a man who had it all. But in the eyes of his colleagues, he saw his reflection hollow, distant. The company had mainly recovered from its financial collapse, but what had fallen apart inside him couldn't be measured in numbers. Every night he returned home, turned on the hall light, and listened to its echo against the stone walls. No soft voice calling out to him, no clinking of dishes, no faint scent of lavender by the window. One evening, scrolling aimlessly online, he came across a cover story in Bloom International. There she was, her face serene, no longer sad, no longer angry, and no longer his. The headline read, "Lin, the woman who turned cracks into light." He stared at it for a long time. The woman he once told, "You can't survive without me," was now radiant, alive in a way he had never seen. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. Jonathan turned off the screen and sat still. The quiet around him deepened until it felt bottomless. In his mind, his father's voice returned from the day he'd stormed out. "You didn't lose the company, Jonathan. You lost yourself. And when you lose yourself, you lose everything." He began therapy. His therapist, a middle-aged black man with kind eyes, asked gently, "Why do you think you're here?" "I can't sleep. Nothing feels meaningful anymore." "Do you miss her?" "Every day." "Do you want her back because you love her, or because you lost?" Jonathan stayed silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "I just want to be forgiven." The therapist nodded. Forgiveness isn't about making someone come back. It's about stopping yourself from bleeding. The words stunned him. He had never realized he'd been punishing himself, but he had every sleepless night, every empty bottle, every hollow stare in the mirror was its own trial in the courtroom of his mind. One evening, he stumbled upon a video interview. On screen, Lin spoke about soul weave, her tone calm, her smile gentle. "When something breaks, it doesn't mean it's lost its value. It just changes shape. I did too." Jonathan set his glass down, his hand trembling. Her voice filled the room, familiar, yet so far away. In that moment, he understood. Some losses can't be repaired, only lived with. Meanwhile, Lin's life continued in Portland, quiet, beautiful, full of small wonders. Soulweave now had over 10 employees, primarily women who had once been hurt. Each morning, they brewed tea, played music, and began their work unhurried, gentle, like a ritual of peace. Every Sunday, she still taught her workshop, weaving the self back together. Each session welcomed new faces, women carrying sorrow in their eyes but leaving with laughter. Harlin never taught them how to succeed. She only taught them how to live truthfully. One day, while helping a young woman shape a bracelet, she heard a soft voice say, "Lynn, I used to love someone. He told me if I ever left, I'd never survive." Harlin looked up, smiling tenderly. "And yet, you're alive, aren't you?" "Yes." "Then you've already answered your own question." That evening, she told Aunt Mai, "Sometimes I feel like I'm talking to the old version of myself." Aunt Mai smiled. "That's because you've come far enough to look back without hurting anymore." A week later, an invitation arrived. The Women of Innovation Summit, New York City. She scanned the attendees list and froze at a familiar name, Jonathan Baker. For a few minutes, she said nothing. No anger, no fear, just a heartbeat slowing down. "Auntie," she said softly, "I think I'm going to see him again." Aunt Mai poured tea, her tone gentle. "Then see him. When your heart is at peace, the past is just someone who once passed by." I don't know what I'd say. You don't have to say anything. Just look at him with the eyes you never had before, the eyes of someone no longer broken. Harlin smiled faintly and nodded. That night, she opened her window and looked at the sky. The wind of New York was still miles away, but a new chapter in her heart was already stirring. The next morning, she opened her small notebook and wrote, in slow, steady lines, "We are two parallel worlds. One world that once fell apart, one world reborn. We don't need to meet again, as long as we both face the light." She closed the notebook and took a deep breath. Sunlight spilled across the table, catching on rows of silver jewelry ready to be shipped. Among them was a small bracelet, engraved with a single word, "Forgiven." She placed it in a velvet box and wrote the label, "Jonathan Baker, Seattle, WA. No note, no return address. Just a gift sent from someone who had already forgiven, to someone still learning how." Early autumn in New York. The streets were paved with gold leaves, the sky pale blue, the air carrying the scent of beginnings. As the plane descended, Harlin looked through the window and saw the skyline glittering in the morning light. She inhaled deeply. The city felt both foreign and familiar. Years ago, she had walked these streets beside Jonathan for gala nights and fundraisers. Today, she arrived alone. The Women of Innovation Summit took place on the 58th floor of the Hudson Hotel, a vast glass room overlooking Manhattan, filled with entrepreneurs, artists, designers, and speakers. Soft music, golden light, and a faint trace of lavender in the air, a coincidence or fate. It was the same scent she used to choose for her home. Harlin stood by the window, poised and calm, holding a glass of water. No one recognized her as the woman the press once called the symbol of rebirth. She wore a simple long grey dress, her hair tied neatly, a single bracelet, forgiven, glimmering on her wrist. Then the elevator doors opened, and the room seemed to hush momentarily. She looked up. Jonathan stepped in. He was still tall, composed, immaculately dressed in a black suit, but there were threads of silver in his hair now, and his eyes no longer carried pride. He glanced around, and when their eyes met, time hesitated. No music, no noise, just a fleeting collision of two strange and familiar gazes. She nodded, he nodded back. Neither moved closer, nor did they turn away. Only stillness, quiet, unshaken. That afternoon, they sat in a small cafe in the hotel lobby, tucked away from the crowd, facing a rain-dappled window that looked out toward the park. Jonathan spoke first. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. I wasn't going to refuse," she said with a small smile. "After all, we were once part of each other's lives." He tapped a finger lightly on his coffee cup. "I don't know where to start." "Start with the truth." He nodded, his voice low. "It took me a long time to realize. I didn't love you the right way." "Not the right way," she said softly. "Just not at the right time." He smiled faintly, sadness in his eyes. "Maybe so. I was too busy proving I was a successful man when I had you. I forgot you didn't need success. You needed kindness." "You didn't forget," she said. "You just hadn't learned yet." Silence settled between them. In the background, autumn leaves played delicate, wistful. Jonathan broke the silence. I still read about you sometimes. I know, she replied gently. They said you once tried to buy a soulweave bracelet, didn't you? He gave a sheepish smile. Yes, it had the word forgiven engraved on it. I never knew who sent it, but I thought, maybe it was you. I only sent one. Their eyes met. Outside, the rain thickened, blurring the lights beyond the glass. For a moment, the world was just the quiet sound of falling rain and porcelain cups touching the table. Jonathan spoke again. Are you happy, Lynn? Yes. But not the kind of happiness people imagine. It's the peace of looking in the mirror without regret. I'm glad. And you? I'm learning to live kindly, though it's late. She nodded, eyes warm but distant. Late is still better than never. Their conversation flowed easily, no tension, no anger, just two people who once loved, speaking about a love that no longer hurts. I used to think if I could go back, I'd do things differently, he said. I used to think that too. But then I realized that I'd still choose to leave even if I could return. Sometimes we don't end things because love is gone, but because staying means losing ourselves. He looked at her, sorrow flickering faintly. Have you forgiven me? Long ago. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It means I stopped carrying you into my future. She turned toward the window. Across the street, an elderly couple strolled under a shared umbrella, shoulders brushing gently. You know, she said, I used to think marriage was like architecture. Two people are building and holding it up together, afraid it might collapse. But you feared losing appearances, while I feared losing our souls. And so the house fell on its own. Jonathan bowed his head, his voice low. I know, and I'm sorry. You don't need to apologize for my freedom, she said softly. Only to be honest with yours. They sat in silence. In that stillness was the steady rhythm of hearts not racing, not breaking, just closing a chapter. He said quietly, I wish I could go back to tell you you were enough from the beginning. And I wish I could tell my old self that no one can define her worth. Both smiled, gentle, genuine. The kind of smile that comes after forgiveness. When the rain stopped, they rose. Jonathan paid the bill and turned to her. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for finally being honest. They stepped outside into the crisp, post-rain air. The city smelled of coffee and wet leaves. He held out a hand. May I have a handshake? She looked at him, then placed her hand in his. No tremor, no weight. Be well, Jonathan. Be happy, Lynn. They let go. He walked west, she walked east. Two opposite directions, beneath the same clear sky. On the sidewalk, she paused and looked up. The sunlight spilled across her face. She whispered, to no one but herself, we were the architects of what almost was, and we finished our unfinished design, by learning to let it go. Then she walked on, light-footed, without turning back. Across the street, Jonathan stopped for a moment, watching her silhouette disappear into the crowd, and he smiled the first genuine smile in years, free of bitterness. Two people, two worlds, no longer parallel, no longer tangled, just two rivers, flowing toward different seas. Both are still reflecting the same Sunday. Winter in Los Angeles. The city of dreams shimmered brighter than usual that night. Under a sky as clear as glass, the Glasswell Tower glowed, each floor reflecting golden ribbons of light like falling stars. Inside, the Women of Vision Gala was underway, celebrating women who had shaped the world with grace and resilience. Lynn was among the honorees, chosen to receive the Symbol of Renewal and Social Creativity Award, 2025. She stood backstage, her heart steady, her breath even, no nerves, no fear, only a stillness as calm as water. Aunt Mai stood beside her, adjusting the hem of her long white dress, simple, hand-sewn by Lynn and the women of Soulweave. No diamonds, no silk, no extravagance, only fabric woven with stories. Are you ready, dear? Aunt Mai asked. I don't think anyone's ever truly ready for moments this big, Lynn said softly. But I'm at peace, and maybe that's enough. It's enough, Aunt Mai smiled. When peace finds you, light will too. From the stage came the voice of the host. The woman you're about to meet reminds us that the most beautiful victories are sometimes born from loss. Please welcome Lynn, founder of Soulweave Foundation. Applause rolled through the hall like waves. She stepped forward. The lights met her gently warm, soft, golden. Hundreds of people stood, clapping. The cameras followed her slow, steady walk, graceful, sure, never proud. She stopped before the microphone, bowed slightly, and smiled. Her voice carried through the hall clear, low, and calm. I once believed that some things, once lost, would end me. But I learned what's truly unbearable isn't losing something. It's living in what was never real. The room fell silent. There are cracks that seem like endings, but they're just the places where light finds its way in. I know this because I was once that crack. She lifted her head. The lights shimmered in her eyes. Tonight, I don't stand here as a symbol of success. I'm just proof that you can lose everything, status, love, safety, and still have everything, if you haven't lost yourself. The applause rose again, thunderous this time. People wiped their eyes. Across the audience, women of every age looked at her as if seeing their own reflection. Among them sat Jonathan. He was quiet in the third row. No one knew he was there. He hadn't come with anyone, nor under any title. Just a man who had once failed and now came to listen to the woman he'd lost speak about how she'd found life again. When she finished her speech, the light swept briefly over his face. Their eyes met just for a heartbeat. No bitterness, no sorrow, only forgiveness. She bowed and left the stage. He rose and clapped. Slow, steady, true. After the ceremony, congratulations surrounded her from every direction. But Lin slipped away outside, to the open balcony high above the city, where no cameras reached. The night air was cool, scented faintly with orange blossoms. Below, the city lights streamed like constellations in motion. She leaned against the railing, exhaled, and let the stillness settle. The air was cold, but her heart was warm. Then footsteps. Jonathan. He stopped a few steps behind her. No closer, no words. She didn't turn around. "You came all this way?" she asked, softly. "I wanted to hear you speak. One last time. Not to ask for anything. To know you're really okay." "You can see I am," she said gently. "Yes," he murmured. "More beautiful and peaceful than I remember." The wind stirred. Her hair brushed across her shoulders. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, voice rough, "for not knowing how to keep the best thing I ever had. It's all right, Jonathan. If you hadn't let me fall, I'd never have learned how to fly." He gave a faint, wistful smile. "I think you're the one I'll love for the rest of my life." "Maybe," she said softly. "But sometimes love is just the first chapter of a bigger story, the one where we finally learn to love ourselves." They stood in silence, two silhouettes framed against the city's glitter. Neither spoke. Only the faint hum of piano music from inside, rising and fading like a farewell. Jonathan took a small step forward. "Did you really forgive me?" She turned, her smile tender as mist. "I did. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back." He nodded slowly, eyes full of acceptance, not pain. "Thank you. For living so beautifully that you made me believe in goodness again." She didn't answer. She looked up at the sky. "Do you see those cracks between the stars, Jonathan?" "I do. That's where the light comes through, just like us." Herr Sealant. The wind blew harder, carrying the scent of orange blossoms and endings. "Goodbye, Lin," he whispered. "Goodbye, Jonathan." He turned and walked away. She watched him until his figure disappeared into the city's golden haze. Then she faced the skyline again. The reflection of Los Angeles lights danced in her eyes, bright as twin stars. She whispered to herself, and to the man now lost in the crowd, "At last, we've both stepped into the light." She smiled, inhaled deeply, and closed her eyes. Her grandmother, Aunt Mai, and all the women she had taught appeared in her mind. Together they formed a mosaic of color and courage, the living tapestry called Soul Weave. Opening her phone, she typed her first post after the gala. "I once lost everything, but I've learned this. No one is truly lost, as long as they rise and share the light they've found." She pressed post. The city's glow touched her face, soft, golden. The wind still blew, but it no longer felt cold. And under the vast Los Angeles sky, where light met shadow, Lin smiled, complete, free, and full of love.